The rain hammered against the cobblestones of occupied Lyon as Marie Dubois pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders. At 32 years old, she appeared to be just another Frenchwoman hurrying home from work in the dreary autumn of 1943. But beneath her unremarkable exterior, Marie carried secrets that could change the course of the war. She was Nightingale, one of the most effective resistance operatives in all of occupied France, and tonight she was walking into the lion's den. Marie's journey to this moment had begun 3 years earlier, when German tanks rolled through her beloved homeland. She had been a schoolteacher then, content with her quiet life in Lyon, sharing her small apartment with her younger brother Antoine and caring for their elderly mother. The war had seemed like something happening to other people, in other places, until the morning she watched German soldiers march down the Rue de la République, while French civilians stood silently on the sidewalks, their faces masks of barely contained rage and fear. Everything changed on a crisp October morning in 1940, when Antoine failed to return from what should have been a routine trip to the market. Marie waited all day, pacing their small apartment, checking and rechecking the clock on the mantel. As evening fell, Mrs. Rousseau from the apartment downstairs knocked on her door with tears in her eyes and terrible news. Antoine had been caught distributing anti-German leaflets and had been arrested by the Gestapo. He was 19 years old. Marie never saw her brother again. Official inquiries led nowhere. The German authorities claimed no knowledge of any Antoine Dubois, but Marie knew better, and the knowledge transformed her from a mild-mannered teacher into something far more dangerous. Within 6 months, she had made contact with the French resistance and begun her double life as Nightingale, specializing in intelligence gathering and the coordination of escape routes for downed Allied airmen. What would you do if your family member disappeared into the Nazi system? Could you find the courage to fight back? Now, 3 years later, Marie had received the most important and dangerous assignment of her career. Allied intelligence had learned that SS Oberfuhrer Heinrich Krüger, the man responsible for coordinating anti-resistance operations throughout southeastern France, would be attending a reception at the Hotel Terminus tonight. More importantly, he would be carrying documents detailing planned raids against resistance cells throughout the region, information that could save hundreds of lives. The Hotel Terminus was the perfect cover for such a gathering. Once Lyon's grandest hotel, it had been commandeered by the Germans and now served as both luxury accommodation for high-ranking officers and unofficial headquarters for the local Gestapo. The hotel's opulent ballroom, with its crystal chandeliers and gilt-framed mirrors, had become the setting for elaborate receptions where Nazi officials mingled with French collaborators, celebrating their supposed victory over the French spirit. Marie's plan was audacious in its simplicity. For months, she had been cultivating an identity as Madame Beaumont, the widow of a wealthy industrialist who had supposedly profited from German contracts. She had attended smaller gatherings, gradually building relationships with wives of German officers and French collaborators. Her cover story was perfect: a lonely widow seeking companionship and validation in the social circles of occupied Lyon. Tonight's reception was her opportunity to get close to Krüger and somehow obtain the documents he carried. The plan required her to play a role that went against everything she believed in. She would have to charm Nazi officers, laugh at their jokes, and pretend to support their cause. For someone who had dedicated her life to fighting the occupation, the psychological toll was enormous. Marie arrived at the Hotel Terminus at exactly 8 o'clock, dressed in an elegant black evening gown that had belonged to her mother. She had spent hours preparing for this night, studying German phrases, practicing her cover story, and mentally rehearsing every aspect of her performance. As she approached the hotel entrance, her heart raced, but her face remained composed, displaying the mild smile of a woman looking forward to a pleasant social evening. The hotel lobby buzzed with activity. German officers in immaculate uniforms mingled with French civilians whose forced smiles couldn't quite hide their discomfort. Waiters moved between groups carrying trays of champagne and canapes, their faces carefully neutral. The scene was a perfect representation of occupied France, a facade of normalcy hiding an undercurrent of tension, collaboration, and resistance. Marie spotted Kruger almost immediately. He was exactly as described by Allied intelligence, tall, stern-faced, and with premature gray hair and the bearing of a career military officer. More importantly, she could see the leather document case he carried, never letting it out of his sight. The case was chained to his wrist, a clear indication of the importance of its contents. Have you ever had to pretend to be someone completely different from who you really are? How did it feel? Madame Beaumont, the voice belonged to Frau Weber, the wife of a German colonel whom Marie had met at previous gatherings. The woman approached with the enthusiasm of someone starved for interesting conversation. How wonderful to see you again! You simply must meet my husband's new associate, Oberfuhrer Kruger. He's just arrived from Berlin with fascinating stories about the Reich's latest victories. Marie felt her pulse quicken, but maintained her composure as Frau Weber led her across the crowded room. This was exactly the opportunity she had hoped for, but it was happening faster than anticipated. She would have to be perfect in her performance. One wrong word, one suspicious gesture, and her mission would end in disaster. Oberfuhrer Kruger, Frau Weber said with obvious pride, I would like you to meet Madame Claire Beaumont. She's one of our most delightful French friends, always so supportive of German efforts to bring order to this region. Kruger turned to face Marie, his pale blue eyes studying her with the calculated intensity of a man trained to spot deception. For a moment, Marie felt as if he could see straight through her carefully constructed facade. But then his expression softened slightly and he offered a formal bow. Enchanted, Madame Beaumont, he said in accented but fluent French. Frau Weber speaks very highly of you. She tells me you lost your husband in the early days of the war. Yes, Oberfuhrer. My dear Claude was killed in the fighting near Sedan in 1940. He believed, as I do, that France's future lies in cooperation with the new European order. The lie burned her throat, but it had the desired effect. Kruger's expression became more sympathetic and he moved closer, lowering his voice in what appeared to be genuine concern. I am sorry for your loss, madame. War is always hardest on those who must wait at home. Your husband's sacrifice was not in vain. France will emerge stronger from this period of adjustment. As the evening progressed, Marie found herself drawn deeper into conversation with Kruger and his circle. The German officer was intelligent and well-educated, speaking knowledgeably about French literature, art, and history. Under different circumstances, she might have found him genuinely interesting. Instead, every cultured word he spoke reminded her of the brutality that lay beneath the veneer of civilization. The reception moved through several phases: cocktails and conversation, followed by a formal dinner in the hotel's grand dining room. Marie found herself seated at a table that included Kruger, several other German officers, and their French collaborator guests. The conversation flowed between German and French, touching on everything from recent military victories to plans for post-war reconstruction. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Could you maintain such a deception while sitting among your enemies? Throughout the meal, Marie carefully observed Kruger's habits and behavior. The document case never left his side, chained to his left wrist and resting on his lap during dinner. He was clearly a careful man, trained in security protocols and suspicious by nature. Getting access to those documents would require more than charm and social engineering. It would require genuine cunning. As dessert was served, Marie noticed that Kruger had consumed several glasses of wine with his meal. While he showed no obvious signs of intoxication, she detected a slight relaxation in his normally rigid posture. More importantly, she noticed that he occasionally rubbed his left wrist where the chain attached to the document case. The chain was clearly heavier than it appeared, and wearing it for hours was becoming uncomfortable. Oberfuhrer, Marie said during a lull in conversation. You seem uncomfortable. Is everything all right? Kruger glanced down at his wrist with a slight frown. It's nothing, madame. Just the weight of responsibility, you might say. He gestured toward the document case with wry humor. Sometimes the tools of our work become burdensome. Marie seized the opportunity. Perhaps you would join me for a brief walk in the hotel gardens. The rain has stopped, and I find fresh air always helps with tension. My late husband used to say that sometimes the most important work requires moments of clarity. It was a calculated risk. She was essentially asking a high-ranking Nazi officer to take a private walk with her, potentially alone. If Kruger became suspicious, the invitation could end her mission immediately, but if he accepted, it might provide the opportunity she needed to get closer to the documents. Kruger studied her face for a long moment, then smiled. That sounds delightful, Madame Beaumont. I confess that Berlin can make one forget the simple pleasures of French hospitality. They excused themselves from the table and made their way through the hotel to a set of French doors that opened onto a small garden courtyard. The space had once been beautifully maintained, but 3 years of war had taken their toll. The flower beds were overgrown, and several statues bore chips and cracks from neglect. Still, the October air was crisp and clean after the stuffy atmosphere of the reception. As they walked along a gravel path, Marie began implementing the next phase of her plan. She had studied Kruger's background extensively and knew he was originally from Munich, had studied philosophy before joining the SS, and had a reputation for intellectual pursuits. She began drawing him into a discussion of German philosophy, particularly Nietzsche's concept of the Überman and its application to National Socialist ideology. The strategy worked perfectly. Kruger became animated as he discussed his favorite philosophers, clearly enjoying the opportunity to engage with someone who seemed to understand and appreciate German intellectual traditions. As his enthusiasm grew, his guard dropped further, and Marie noticed that he had begun gesturing more freely with both hands, occasionally forgetting about the document case entirely. Could you engage in intellectual discussion with someone whose ideology you found repugnant? What would that feel like? You know, Madame Beaumont, Kruger said as they paused beside a small fountain, it's rare to find someone, especially a French person, who truly understands the philosophical foundations of our movement. Most people see only the surface, the politics and military actions. They miss the deeper vision of human potential and social evolution. Marie nodded thoughtfully, playing her role perfectly. I think many of my countrymen have been blinded by nationalism and failed to see the broader historical forces at work. My husband often said that true wisdom lies in recognizing when old systems must give way to new ones. As she spoke, Marie noticed something crucial. Kruger had become so engaged in their conversation that he had unconsciously shifted the document case to his right side, allowing the chain to relax against his left wrist. More importantly, she could see that the case's lock mechanism was a simple combination system rather than a key lock. If she could get close enough to observe him opening it, she might be able to memorize the combination. The opportunity came sooner than expected. As they continued their walk, Kruger's aide appeared in the garden doorway, clearly searching for his superior. Upon spotting them, the young officer hurried over with obvious urgency. Oberfuhrer, forgive the interruption, the aide said in rapid German. There's been a development in the Marseille situation. We've received new intelligence that requires your immediate attention. Kruger frowned, clearly annoyed at the interruption. Can it not wait until morning, Brenner? I'm afraid not, sir. The information concerns potential resistance activity that may require immediate action. Marie's heart skipped a beat. Were they talking about resistance cells she knew? Had other operations been compromised? She maintained her composure while listening carefully to the German conversation, grateful for the language lessons she had received during her resistance training. Kruger turned to Marie with genuine regret. I apologize, Madame Beaumont. Duty calls, as I'm sure you understand. Perhaps we could continue our discussion at a future gathering. Of course, Oberfuhrer, I completely understand. Thank you for such a stimulating conversation. As the two men prepared to leave, Kruger needed to consult something in his document case. Marie watched carefully as he turned the combination lock, noting each number as his fingers moved. 1933. She committed the sequence to memory while maintaining casual conversation about the evening's entertainment. Let us know in the comments what you think happened next. After Kruger and his aide departed, Marie remained in the garden for several minutes, ostensibly enjoying the night air, while actually planning her next move. The reception was still in full swing, and she estimated she had perhaps an hour before the gathering would begin to break up. She needed to find a way to access Kruger's private quarters or office space within the hotel and examine the contents of that document case. Returning to the reception, Marie mingled casually while conducting reconnaissance. Through conversations with various guests, she learned that Kruger was staying in the hotel's executive suite on the 3rd floor. More importantly, she discovered from Frau Weber that the Oberfuhrer had a habit of working late into the night and often used the hotel's private study room on the 2nd floor for confidential meetings and document review. Marie excused herself from the reception, claiming a slight headache, and made her way to the hotel's main elevator. The operator, an elderly French man whose eyes held the tired resignation common among civilians in occupied territory, asked for her destination without making eye contact. "2nd floor, please," Marie said with the casual confidence of a hotel guest. "I promised Oberfuhrer Kruger I would retrieve some documents from the study." The elevator operator nodded without interest and delivered her to the 2nd floor. Marie had counted on the assumption that any well-dressed French woman at a German reception must be there legitimately. In occupied France, few people questioned the movements of apparent collaborators. The 2nd floor hallway was dimly lit and empty. Marie moved quietly along the carpet, checking nameplates until she found the private study room Frau Weber had mentioned. The door was locked, but Marie had come prepared. During her years with the resistance, she had learned many useful skills, including basic lockpicking. The hotel's locks were old-fashioned and yielded to her practiced touch within minutes. The study was exactly what she had expected: a small, elegantly appointed room with a large desk, comfortable chairs, and built-in bookshelves. More importantly, she spotted Kruger's document case sitting on the desk, apparently left there while he dealt with the urgent matter his aide had reported. Marie approached the case carefully, listening for any sounds from the hallway. The combination lock opened easily with the sequence she had observed: 1933. Inside, she found exactly what Allied intelligence had hoped for: detailed documents outlining planned raids against resistance cells throughout southeastern France, scheduled for the following week. Working quickly, Marie photographed each document with the miniature camera she carried in her purse. The intelligence was devastating in its completeness: names, addresses, meeting locations, even the identities of suspected resistance sympathizers who were under surveillance. If these raids proceeded as planned, the entire resistance network in the region would be destroyed. What would you do with information that could save hundreds of lives but might expose your own identity? But as Marie photographed the final document, she made a discovery that chilled her to the bone. Among the surveillance targets was her own name, not her cover identity as Madame Beaumont, but her real name, Marie Dubois. The file indicated that she was suspected of resistance activities and was scheduled for arrest within the next 48 hours. Somehow, despite all her precautions, that the Gestapo had identified her. The revelation threatened to overwhelm her with panic, but Marie forced herself to remain focused. She carefully returned all documents to their original positions and closed the case, resetting the combination lock. Whatever happened to her personally, this intelligence had to reach the resistance leadership so they could warn the targeted cells and abort the planned operations. As she prepared to leave the study, Marie heard footsteps in the hallway outside. Heavy boots on carpet, definitely German military. She quickly moved away from the desk and positioned herself near the bookshelf, grabbing a volume of French poetry to provide cover for her presence in the room. The door opened and Kruger entered with his aide. The Oberfuhrer looked surprised to see her, but not immediately suspicious. "Madame Beaumont, what brings you here?" Marie smiled apologetically, holding up the book of poetry. "I hope you don't mind, Oberfuhrer. After our wonderful conversation about German philosophy, I found myself thinking about the parallels in French literature. Frau Weber mentioned that you had an excellent collection in your private study, and I couldn't resist browsing. I hope that wasn't presumptuous." Kruger glanced at the book in her hands, a volume of Baudelaire, and his expression softened. "Not at all, madame. I'm flattered that our discussion inspired further reflection. Please feel free to borrow the volume if it interests you." "You're too kind," Marie replied, genuinely impressed by his gentlemanly behavior, even as she reminded herself that this same man was responsible for countless arrests and deportations. "I should return to the reception, though. People will wonder where I've disappeared to." As they left the study together, Marie felt the weight of the miniature camera in her purse and the knowledge that she was likely living her last hours of freedom. But she had succeeded in her mission. The intelligence would reach Allied hands, the resistance cells would be warned, and hundreds of lives would be saved. Share your thoughts about Marie's courage and sacrifice in the comments below. The following morning, Marie began the complex process of getting her intelligence to the right people while simultaneously planning her own escape from Lyon. She had perhaps 24 hours before the Gestapo came for her, and she intended to make the most of that time. Using established resistance communication channels, she transmitted the photographed documents to London via radio, providing Allied intelligence with complete details of the planned raids. Simultaneously, she sent coded messages to resistance cell leaders throughout the region, warning them of their compromised status and advising immediate dispersal. The effect was dramatic and immediate. Over the following days, Gestapo raids found nothing but empty safe houses and abandoned meeting places. The resistance network that Kruger had expected to destroy simply melted away, leaving the Germans grasping at shadows. Months of intelligence work and surveillance had been rendered useless by a single night's operation. As for Marie herself, she had one final act to perform. Rather than simply fleeing Lyon, she decided to attend one last social gathering, a small dinner party hosted by Frau Weber. It was an enormous risk, but Marie wanted to observe Kruger's reaction to the failure of his planned raids and gather any additional intelligence about German countermeasures. The dinner party took place 2 days after the failed raids, and the atmosphere was markedly different from the celebratory mood at the Hotel Terminus reception. German officers spoke in hushed tones about security breaches and potential traitors. Kruger himself appeared haggard and suspicious, his earlier charm replaced by cold professionalism. During the evening, Marie overheard fragments of conversation that revealed the true extent of the German failure. Not only had the resistance cells escaped the planned raids, but several had used their advance warning to launch counterattacks against German installations. An ammunition depot had been destroyed, 2 collaborators had been eliminated, and a German convoy had been ambushed. Kruger's intelligence coup had become a disaster, but she had succeeded in her mission beyond all expectations. The intelligence she provided allowed the resistance network in southeastern France to regroup and continue fighting. The planned German raids, which would have been devastating, had been completely neutralized. Most importantly, hundreds of resistance fighters lived to continue the fight for French freedom. After the war, Marie learned that her intelligence coup had contributed to one of the most significant setbacks suffered by German anti-resistance operations in occupied France. Kruger himself had been recalled to Berlin in disgrace and had never returned to France. The resistance networks that Marie had saved went on to play crucial roles in supporting the D-Day landings and the eventual liberation of France. Marie eventually returned to Lyon in 1946, but she was a changed woman. The schoolteacher who had lived quietly with her brother and mother no longer existed. In her place was someone harder, wiser, and marked by the knowledge of what ordinary people could accomplish when faced with impossible odds. She never learned what had happened to Antoine, and that uncertainty remained with her for the rest of her life. Let us know how this story of courage and sacrifice affected you. But Marie's greatest legacy was not personal. It was the proof that resistance could succeed against even the most efficient and brutal occupying force. Her single night's work at the Hotel Terminus demonstrated that courage, intelligence, and careful planning could triumph over superior resources and organization. She outsmarted the Gestapo not through violence or dramatic heroics, but through the quiet application of human intelligence and determination. The miniature camera that Marie used that night is now displayed in the Museum of the Resistance in Lyon, along with copies of the documents she photographed. Visitors often pause before the display, marveling at the simple tools that were used to achieve such extraordinary results. The camera is tiny, unremarkable, the kind of device that could easily be overlooked or dismissed as insignificant. But that small camera, in the hands of a determined French schoolteacher, helped change the course of the war in southeastern France. It stands as a testament to the power of ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary things when they are willing to risk everything for the cause of freedom. Marie Dubois, who became Madame Beaumont for one crucial night, proved that sometimes the most effective resistance comes not from dramatic gestures, but from quiet courage and careful intelligence. Her story reminds us that heroes are not always the people who make headlines or receive medals. Sometimes they are school teachers who attend dinner parties, smile politely at their enemies, and then risk everything to save the lives of people they will never meet. Marie Dubois was such a hero, ordinary in appearance, extraordinary in courage, and absolutely vital to the cause of freedom. If you enjoyed this story of courage and sacrifice, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment to share your thoughts.